It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Smooth and Savvy is joined by some of the hottest talent in the entertainment industry, from musicians to authors and all those in between. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Mr. Smooth and Savvy himself, Douglas Coleman.
Hello. Hey, hee, ha. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are ya? I'm doing really well today. If you're into astrology, or if you check your horoscope in the newspaper or online or something like that, you might find my guest interesting. And if you don't, if you're a skeptic, if you think that astrology is nothing more than a parlor trick or gypsy lady with the crystal ball, then you also might find my guest interesting because he explains what real astrology is. This isn't really a parlor game. This is actually more of a science. And it dates back many hundreds and hundreds of years. And he has got a list of clients from A-list celebrities in Hollywood to politicians to business owners. So he will be up in the second half of the show. But before we get to him, we've got more Music X-Ray music to play. Thank you very much to everybody who has been submitting through Music X-Ray. We're really getting lots of great music, and I'm very happy about that and also very happy to play them. Today we've got 3. The first one is an instrumental, which is a little bit different. We don't usually play instrumentals, but this one's a real nice one. It's called Luna, and it's by Paul Blissett. The second one is called Force of Nature by Mojo Filter. And we have Forever an Ocean by Nicole Marie.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of the Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps from the UK, record producer, engineer. You might have heard of me. I've worked with artists from Elton John to Led Zeppelin to Bad Company, Twisted Sister, Robbie Williams, Oasis, many great bands and artists in the past and the present and hopefully in the future. But you can work with me as well. You know, all you got to do is get in touch with me on eppsmusicproductions.com. That's EWPSproductionsmusic.com. And I can help you with your productions and with your recordings. A lot of people do home recordings now, which you can only take so far. Maybe they need a bit of professional help. So get in touch with me and we can sort it out. And thanks for Douglas Coleman for giving me this spot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye.
My motivation wasn't purely straight ahead, 'cause these situations, they start messing with your head. And those conversations, well, they stumble to the dead. You saw it, I called it, we're both walking wounded. But just a little to the right, and just a little less last night. It was alright. We'll just resist the force of nature, bring down a fist upon the creature, get to the heart of what we're made of. Save this story in the final pages, dig deep and find the temptation, the big leap, the peak, the elevation. Forget the shred of hesitation, all we are is all we need to mention. This inclination to get worn down by the weight, those conversations, the ones that seem a bit too late. The fact we're facing is always pretty great. I saw it, you called it, this hill we're dying on it. But just a little to the right, you know we could just let it ride, 'cause it's alright. We'll just resist the force of nature, bring down a fist upon the creature, get to the heart of what we're made of. Save this story in the final pages, get deep and find the temptation, the big leap, the beat, the elevation. Forget the shred of hesitation, all we are is all we need to mention. We'll just resist the force of nature, bring down a fist upon the creature, get to the heart of what we're made of. Save this story in the final pages, get deep and find the temptation, the big leap, the beat, the elevation. Forget the shred of hesitation, all we are is all we need to mention. We'll just resist the force of nature, bring down a fist upon the creature, get to the heart of what we're made of. Save this story in the final pages, get deep and find the temptation, the big leap, the beat, the elevation. Forget the shred of hesitation, all we are is all we need to mention. We'll just resist the force of nature, bring down a fist upon the creature, get to the heart of what we're made of. Save this story in the final pages, dig deep and find the temptation, the big leap, the peak, the elevation. Forget the shred of hesitation, all we are is all we need to mention.
You can have your stolen moments, you can have your eye candy. I'll write a song, I'll write a song. You can lie about your feelings, about any little thing. I'll write a song, I'll write a song. Some are sweet and some are sad and some are angry ones. There's nothing that inspires me more in life than our love, our love, our love, our love. trust is gone. You can put your wife before me and everyone else before me. I'll write a song, I'll write a song. Some are sweet and some are sad and some are angry ones. There's nothing that inspires me more in life than art.
Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! Ooh, don't know my own strength.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Jeff Harman is a second-generation astrologer and spiritual consultant with 40 years' experience. He teaches how conscious self-awareness can lead us out of the matrix of our karmic past, which is revealed by practices of spiritual awareness and the ancient system of classic Vedic, V-E-D-I-C, and Kabbalistic astrology. He is based in Los Angeles and has clients in many areas of business and in the entertainment industry. Okay, please welcome Jeff Harman. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on the show. You are an astrological consultant, and you also have a film company called Conjunction LLC, which we'll get to in a bit. I'm curious about one thing on your bio that hit me right off the top. It says you're a second-generation astrologer. So this has been running in your family. Who was your mother? Your father was an astrologer?
It was my mother, yeah. It was my mother.
Oh, tell us about that.
Well, what happened in the 60s, I saw her. My mother was a nurse practitioner eventually. She started out as an LPN, then went to an RN nurse. And in the 60s, she used to have medical astrology journals sitting around where she had books that various different doctors throughout time had tried to introduce medical astrology. Now, in the East, that's known as Ayurvedic astrology. And in the West, we just kind of call it, quote unquote, medical astrology. And I didn't think anything of it. But in the 70s, when I started driving and, of course, dating, my mother would very accurately describe traits of my girlfriends. And I'm like, this isn't mother's intuition. There's something going on here. It's a little deeper. So I started asking her, what are you doing? And I was actually quite skeptical at the time because I was very heady into science and music and all that type of stuff and didn't really believe astrology had any efficacy and could work. And to my amazement, there's no way she could have known what she did the way she knew it unless she was using a tool that was accurate. And so I started studying it and learned that it wasn't what modern astrology has made it out to be, all these sun sign things, but it was very specific astronomy scientifically applied. That's the difference between the ancient astrology and the more traditional and Vedic systems than modern astrology. Astrology doesn't use it, but it's not the same.
So what is the tie-in between astrology and astronomy then?
Oh, a lot. And I think that is specifically what makes ancient astrology a superior tool. Most of your, if the history books could be rewritten, like Galileo and Newton, many of these people were very astute astronomers, but an astronomer back then was an astrologer. Where that radically departed was in the modern age of the Industrial Revolution, particularly the late 1600s, early 1700s. That's when everything shifted to science took one fork in the road, and spiritualism and astrology took another one. And it was, a lot due to the religions damning it and calling it the work of the devil and all the superstitious stuff. And I would also attribute that a lot to the translations out of Hebrew, Aramaic into the various languages, such as Latin particularly, and many other languages, where it got construed that any type of divination whatsoever, and astrology be damned was included, ended up in the hopper of the work of the devil. When it was carried on, I think the Nicene councils in the 1500s were largely, I should say not 1500s, but more like 400 and 500s, all the way up to about the late 700s or 800s was clearly responsible for that. And modern astrology has its virtues too, but ancient astrology was so different because they actually looked at the speeds of planets and the latitudes and longitudes. Very, very scientific application of astronomy applied to what we now call astrology.
Okay, well, there does tend to be two schools of thought regarding astrology. And it sounds like what you just explained makes sense, where once the religious people came in who said that you shall believe only in this and everything else is the work of the devil. But there are people out there now who still think that astrology is nothing more than the traveling carnival with the fortune teller and the crystal ball, or people who read tea leaves or tarot cards or something like that, that there is, that there really is no truth to it or no credibility for it. How do you deal with people like that? I mean, what do you say to them when, you tell them, well, I'm an astrological consultant?
That's a great question, because I'm kind of blessed that I really don't have to deal with it too much, because the ones that feel that way just stay away. And there's such a body of people who actually do believe in it. Like a good example, Nancy Reagan just passed.
I was just going to bring her up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's more fascinating is people don't realize how steeped astrology is in politics and also in business. And it's used, and that's my blessing is they keep calling me. I've always told my wife, which we've now been together almost 18 years, that astrology pursued me. I didn't pursue it. And there's so many clients that I have all over the world in businesses, in politics, in banking, who utilize my services, not because it's predicting the future, but because it's a tool that aids them practically in life. And same thing with entertainers. I have a lot of A-list, B-list, and C-list entertainers, who I work with, and a lot of people in the production area that I work with. There's many types of astrology in the ancient astrologer's toolbox. One of them, most people know their sun signs, but that's newspaper astrology. The stuff that business people use are things called electional astrology. That's literally picking a specific time to commence an act, like getting married, like buying a house, selling a house. I mean, I have files, not with a little bit of astrology, thousands of charts over the years where people would say, hey, I need to sell a piece of property. I haven't been able to sell it for 2 years. And then they'll call me up and say, what do I do? Well, get it off the market. I'll give you a good time to put it back on the market, either through the realtor or stick the sign in the ground yourself. And bingo, they call me back and go, oh my God, I sold it. I didn't have anybody looking at this thing for 3 years or whatever it was. And I just sold the darn thing in 2 weeks, and I got more money than I was asking. And that doesn't always happen, but it happens a lot. And same thing with marriages. I've reversed engineered marriages and seen the time that someone did get married and it didn't work out. It usually was not at a good time. And this isn't superstition. That's like telling your airline pilot he's superstitious for looking at the radar screen and predicting the future because, a certain weather mass was colliding with another one and he decided not to take that runway. I think that's called science and intelligence. And just like we talk to financial advisors, I'm lucky I don't have to deal with the skepticism of the certain people who are very zealous and dogmatic in their beliefs. They just don't call me. And so far, I've been very blessed that I've never had anyone challenge me in a legal way, because I always try and be honest and always, just do the work.
What are the tools of your trade? What do you actually use if somebody comes to you and says, I want to sell my house or the house isn't selling?
The modus operandi that I use is years ago, when I was studying with my mother and many other teachers, particularly the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we would use literally ephemeruses is what they were called. In India, they call them a panchanga, which is literally a positioning of the heavens. Today, I use very sophisticated computer programs. In fact, NASA was actually consulted in the design of the one that I use. Of course, NASA needs to know when they fire off a rocket how to mathematically extrapolate where it's going to be. So they need to know the positions of the planets very accurately, and they do. And these programs actually use that. But I would say that's the physical side where I'm using a tool now that's very advanced, and thank God for computers, because not only has it helped me in calculation, and I have a funny story to tell. There was a teacher I had back in the 90s, and he was teaching me the ancient art of Vedantic astrology, which is from India and very old. And he was very spiritual, and we would do prayers and mantras before we do charts, because he said that always helps you focus the mind spiritually. And he says, Jeff, you must always cast charts by hand. So we would literally spend 20 minutes just to draft a chart, a birth chart of someone, and color in all the planets. In the late 90s, I showed up with the very first Jyotish or Vedic astrology program, because it's really called Jyotisha. And he went, oh my God, is that fast? And he says, I need to get a copy. I said, oh no, grasshopper, you must always calculate chart by hand. He goes, no, I want a copy. I says, yes, you do. So it's kind of like, you can be Amish and walk to the grocery store. I'm going to take the car. Not that I have any problems with Amish people. I think some of them are wonderful. But modern technology has really revolutionized the speed and accuracy at which astrology can be done.
The word you kept using a couple of times is Vedic.
Yeah, Vedic.
Vedic. Right. Okay. Isn't that sort of a massage therapy in India as well?
No, you're talking Ayurvedic.
Okay. That's the one I'm getting confused.
And I should say Vedic astrology is kind of a pop term. That was coined back in the 60s and 70s. Yogi Bhajan and V.B. Raman and many other astrologers, Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote, many wonderful books and founded the self-realization centers, kind of coined that phrase. Okay. Its true name was called Jyotisha, which is a Sanskrit word that actually means the science of the light of the soul. And in India, there is other more ancient methods called Nadi, N-A-D-I. And there's a whole system that Egypt, India, and that whole band in there of the more Asian, Egyptian, Middle Eastern spiritual people had. You could call them yogis, rabbis, pharaohs, etc. But there certainly seemed to be a time of knowledge that was very, very great about souls. And that's really where ancient astrology radically departs from some of the more modern stuff. They really looked at you not as your astrology, but as a spiritual being having a physical experience, and that the astrology was acting upon the soul much like a vector would for an airline pilot being influenced by weather. And it was up to the rationality of the individual and the soul using free will to make spiritual growth from the challenges that were presented. And I love that philosophy much better, because that does give you empowerment. I think the most powerful tool a person has is their reaction. And they teach this in martial arts. They teach it in business. Reaction is a key tool. You may not be able to stop what's coming at you. It's like when you're driving down the road, you can't stop the freight train that's about to cross your path, but you can certainly stop yourself so you don't have an event that's probably not going to turn out too well.
Well, that's very true. I've heard this similar kind of an analogy used for people that have issues with their marriage, with their spouse,
Sure.
loved ones, even people at work, where you can't help what someone is going to say to you, but you can help how you react to it.
Absolutely.
Now, I've heard that
Yeah,
used with, self-help people, with doctors, with different things. It sounds like sort of a similar thing that you're talking about.
It is. It's really advanced psychology of the soul. And, when I go back to the practical usage of this and, what you were saying before is like, how do I, I have so many people. The premier tools that I use in readings is personal readings where I look at a person's birth chart, their cycles, and the things that are influencing them. And that really gives people a lot of insight to be able to react more appropriately. When it comes to business people, I'm always doing elections, which is timing for important contract signings, weddings, trips, et cetera, business trips, on and on. Forming corporations is another huge one. In the entertainment business, it often comes down to signing contracts. Producers who got a lot of money on the line they want to use every tool available to ensure success. Now, nothing replaces skill, common sense, hard work, and all that.
And a good script.
And a great script, right? With great characters and a good cast. Yeah, absolutely. But even with all of that and some really wonderful skill sets, you can still run into problems. Just like, we don't have very many plane crashes, but they do happen at times. The point is they want to use everything they can. And timing is really important. And how electional astrology works is picking an auspicious time to commence an event. Lunar aspects. And it literally comes down to a practical system where, without getting into the mechanics of astrology, the eastern horizon and western horizon, which are constantly moving in the midheaven, that's for anyone listening, sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight, are the four what we call stakes or points on the cross of matter. And very, very ancient and very powerful. And there are divisions that divide up the circle of the heavens around us. And each one of those divisions represents a specific area of life or interaction that we all have with. And it's very interesting how accurate it is, and belief is not required. I have a lot of people who also use me for something called interrogation astrology. Interrogation astrology is divinational. That's very analogous to, quote unquote, predicting the future, where someone will ask a question and say, is it in my best interest to pursue this business matter? Or is it in my best interest to marry so-and-so? That is the reverse of electional astrology. You're now looking at the querent, meaning the person, and you're looking at what's upcoming aspectually, and meaning the geometry that's happening. And that's where an eyebrow kind of raises. But back to Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan was really the one using astrology. Everyone says, oh, Nancy Reagan. Well, they were protecting Ronald. In fact, there's an astrologer. You can look him up. His name was Carroll Ryder, a man from England who was around a long time in Hollywood, as well as many other astrologers. But he's the one who actually met with Ronald Reagan frequently and had Ronald Reagan be inaugurated as the governor of California at 12:02 midnight. Now, that's kind of a strange time to be sworn in as governor.
Yeah.
And that actually was done astrologically. And Carroll Ryder was around a long, long time. People like Glenn Ford, Burl Ives, very secretly use astrology, and many, many others. Even Steven Spielberg has acknowledged that, these people won't publicly acknowledge it. I think the one that's most interesting to me is Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum used to be a ghost writer, wrote for Carroll Ryder, the astrologer, but did so anonymously and as a ghostwriter. And who would think Robert Mitchum, like the Hollywood tough guy,
Right.
The noir, one of my favorite actors, would have done that. And Robert Mitchum was really an intellectual. And when I have Robert Mitchum's chart. He was born in 1917. And I've had the good fortune of looking at a lot of different people's heights and depths in their careers, progressions and transits, and also in the Vedic astrology really show when those things happen.
Funny about Robert Mitchum, he was one of the first actors to get publicly busted for marijuana. And it actually helped his career back in the day when any little scandal would typically ruin an actor. It actually improved his career.
It did.
Yeah, it was very funny because he got busted like in the 40s before.
He did, that's right.
Yeah, before anybody.
He was actually working on the movie The Big Steal when that happened. And Howard Hughes was instrumental in getting that washed afterwards, after he had served his time. But the minute he got out of jail, he went right to Mexico and worked with Jane Greer on The Big Steal, which was a movie about Robert Mitchum was a carrier for the U.S. Army of payroll, and he was robbed. And they were accusing him of robbing it, and he had to go catch the original perpetrators down in Mexico. So it was a good movie.
One of the other things on your bio that I wanted to touch with you is you did some forensic work with various government agencies.
Well, back then I was not doing astrology then. What I was doing, I had a recording studio from the late 70s all the way up until the mid 90s. And what I had done, it was, I always used to joke around because I would have federal agents and local sheriffs coming in the studio. And then later at night, I'd have some rock band in there, getting drunk. And anyways, it was all walks of life. And that really gave me a lot of opportunity in astrology too, because I always watched all that stuff from another viewpoint. But back to what I was doing in forensics, that I was doing voice print analysis. So it wasn't astrology. What it was acoustical analysis and voice print analysis. I also did a lot of analysis of magnetic tapes. I think the thing that really got me into it, there was a naval officer at the Great Lakes Naval Base just north of Chicago. It's actually in North Chicago, who was accused of murdering a cab driver. The cab driver was found in a park with the doors open, and the prosecutors were doing all kinds of things with the taped evidence, and they're called verbatim transcripts. And I was able to prove, when they said they didn't, that the tape was actually stopped, restarted, edited, and also that there was a lot of whispering. So I was able to lift out for the jury hard evidence for that, and it exonerated the naval officer. And from that, I started getting a lot of other forensics work in that area. But again, that wasn't astrology. That was acoustical and voice print analysis. I would often have to go into federal prisons or state and county jails to voice print a prisoner. One that I was very pleased to have worked on was a man who was doing child pornography and denying it. And of course, I was able to help the feds get this guy because he was coercing young children, and they finally wired a child to go in, and we were able to voice print the suspect and prove it was in fact his voice. And I'll never forget the federal agent. He reminded me of the guy in the Blues Brothers. He goes, "If it's the last thing I do, I'm going to get this guy." And I said, "That's good, because somebody should get this guy." And they did. They got him. His attorney actually got him off the first time. So that wasn't astrology. And it's interesting you bring up forensics work, because I now, since that time in the 80s, have actually been doing forensics astrology, where I've had people call up and ask interrogation charts about missing children, or, and I've had some sad ones that I don't even like to bring up, but where it looked like there wasn't a good outcome and there wasn't. It's very, you just wonder sometimes how human beings can do what they do. And of course we hear it on the news all the time, but I have several thousand charts that are not all crime forensics astrology, but I would say interrogation astrology is about as close to forensics as you can get. The problem with astrology, it's not admissible in court like voice print analysis is,
right,
and acoustics. Police certainly do. I think the police will look at anything, the detectives particularly, and I know the feds are the same way. They'll look at anything they can that will lead them to finding out the truth. Right. Unless, of course, you're Hillary's I shouldn't say. But I would say that yeah, I had to get that in there. But I would say that they will look at it. The problem is you can't run into a court of law, and there's no precedent set. Actually, there is one precedent in astrology. Evangeline Adams, who was the granddaughter of John Quincy Adams, I think it was her that was challenged in court by a judge with astrology. And the judge said, if you can prove to me that this works, and she did, and the judge accepted it. But as a general rule, you can't use astrological evidence. Here's a good example. There was a client who was murdered. She was a state prosecutor in Kansas, and she was my client. And I had warned her prior to that she had some very challenging aspects going on in her chart. But what was really telling is she called me up one day and said, do you think I'm going to get through this divorce, get child custody, and be able to leave the state of Kansas? And I looked at the chart and said, no. I said, I think you're in some real danger here. I felt like Whoopi Goldberg, you're in danger, girl. And what happened is she was. And her husband, the college professor at State University in Manhattan, broke into her house and really savagely stabbed her like 27 times. Mm-hmm. And the irony of the situation was they couldn't bust him. He was so smooth at covering up the evidence that her best girlfriend kept calling me up and saying, do you think they're going to get him? And I said, yes, he's going to go down. And he actually did get convicted. He's doing life plus 20 right now. That was all over the news for a while. So, the astrology was very accurate in determining that. That is forensics astrology. It's just not admissible.
I guess maybe it will be someday, because a lot of things weren't admissible that are now admissible. I mean, back in the 30s, blood tests for confirmation of parental custodies and things were not admissible, and DNA didn't even exist. So, things could change. Maybe someday.
It could. It actually could. And I think if astrology is looked more at as a science.
Right. Rather than a parlor game.
Right. Rather than a parlor game. Yeah. And, you had mentioned, really wisely earlier, how do I deal with the attacks of that? Well, the people attacking astrology just don't call me. The ones who have found it useful keep calling. I have so many clients. I think the internet has really revolutionized the last decade, because I now have clients all over the world. They call me up and I send them a code in their email. They just double click on the code. They're right into my computer. And they can screen record if they have a Mac, or they can also screen record with a program on a PC. And they literally make a movie of their reading with the audio. And it's absolutely amazing, because, the days of people walking out of my office with a pile of papers and a whirring cassette tape are gone. The internet is just astounding. I mean, I have clients literally all over this planet that call in, and we're instantly speaking. The only variable we have is the time zones, and that works out,
Well, the internet has touched everyone's life in one way or another, and basically every aspect of commerce. It's totally revolutionized. I mean, to me, I think the advent of the internet is probably as profound to mankind as electricity was at the turn of the century.
I agree with you. I absolutely. And you know what? I think we're going to see a lot more. Speaking of astrology, we are on the precedence of an unparalleled change, very analogous to where we were in the late 1600s, early 1700s, when the Industrial Revolution hit us. We are about ready to hit a high-tech revolution, unlike we've never seen. Though I think between now and 2021, we're going to see some real serious growing pains, and hopefully they don't get too serious. The astrology says it could get pretty intense financially and militarily. This thing overseas in the Middle East with Iran and ISIS and all this, I think could get a lot bigger than we think. I hope it doesn't. But once you turn the page, which really that's what ancient astrology looked at, was when do major chapters in society change. And we're on it. We're everybody kept asking me, what do you think about 2012 and the Mayan calendar? I just, not much. I can't come up with a single thing. And look at people, we're running out there buying, holes in the ground for $100,000, stacking food to the ceiling and, waiting for Nibiru to come in and pummel them with meteors. Nothing happened.
Bottled thing. Water and batteries. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of water, a lot of batteries, a lot of food got sold, and a lot of fear. And fear always sells things. And
Sure,
there's nothing
does.
wrong with being prudent, but I couldn't come up with a thing in the astrology that would warrant that kind of events happening. What I do see is more economic and military upheavals going on between now and 221. But after that, which is really not very far away, 2020, the winter solstice of 2020 actually marks a 240-year cycle commencing, or one ending and a new one beginning. And I think we're going to see explosions in medicine, genetics, travel. We see it on TV right now. Look you've got cars that park themselves. You've got cars that stop themselves, and which is wonderful technology and really serves humanity. These kinds of technologies in computer control systems and robotics are what's going to pave the way for the Jetson society, where we're flying around like George and Janine Jetson.
Right.
And, I really think it's right around the corner. It just hasn't become economically feasible, and the world doesn't seem to do these things until it's ready. But you look at what's the advances in material researches and magnetics and genetics, and it's mind-blowing. And I think we're going to see it. We're going to live to see it.
Well, one of the ones that I think is a bit scary is the implanting of little microchips in people's heads so that they can track you everywhere you go. I mean, the technology is there in the sense that if you're carrying around your iPhone, you can pretty much be tracked.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah. You can pretty much be tracked right to the spot that you're standing anywhere in the world. Okay. So it's only one more step. What?
I love that with my child because I can see right where he is.
Sure. Yeah. But on the other hand, do we want the government watching every single person, tracking their every single move? I don't know, because then it gets to an issues of privacy.
But then again, what are they going to do with it all? I mean, if they want you, trust me, they'll get you. If you're doing something illegal, that actually has virtue too.
Sure.
There's a flip two sides to each coin. I mean, if someone's doing something, there's some positive. But you're right. There's also the issue of mood, RF frequencies. There's psychotronic weapons. There's all kinds of stuff. The abuse of this technology could be very dangerous.
It's like nuclear power. I mean, you can have it to generate electricity, or you can take out a city.
Yep.
So
that's right.
It depends on how you use it, for the good or for the bad, I suppose. And
exactly
where it gets to be an interesting debate with the internet is people like authors and musicians who have said that it's a double-edged sword about internet technology and how it's affected artistic license and the ability to create art, if you will. There are so many people out there that are writing books and publishing them on Amazon, where before the internet, that wasn't possible. You really had to write something out, do 3 drafts of it on paper, and then you had to get somebody to shop it around to the big publishing houses for you, because if you sent it in unsolicited, they would throw it in the bin. Now everybody is self-published. There's so much out there that it's hard to find the good stuff because you've got to wade through all of this crap of everybody who thinks they're the next Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, technology has allowed that to happen. So I don't know if that's good or
It
bad.
has.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to do about that one. But, I still say what you just said is doing drafts and having good skill sets. That goes back to astrology. I have a lot of people call me up who may not be as skilled sometimes as the people who really done the work. And astrology can help them because timing often really puts the wind at your back, but that's not going to make a good script. Where I find the people that really get somewhere are the ones that are already skilled and they really have done the work. And now they just don't want it ending up in the sewer. They don't want it in the ditch. They want it on the highway. They want it moving fast, in analogy, and they want as little encumbrances as possible. And that's, I know I use astrology all the time. I really do. And I have found it's not superstition. It's literally just energy. And sometimes you have to dive off the diving board when the water isn't warm. That's my analogy. And meaning that sometimes you have to commence an act when the energies aren't perfect. And just knowing where they are is a big advantage because you operate differently when you know where you're at. It's like an airline pilot. They fly all the time. When it's raining, there's winds, there's weather conditions, but there's a lot of measures we can take. Like, for instance, don't break out the hot coffee if it's going to be a bumpy ride right away. Get to a different altitude and then break it out. You see, so that's the way I like to look at astrology. It's very practically, not superstitiously. And people trying to cut corners and say, oh, geez, if I file this script with the agent when the moon's conjuncting Venus and the script's a piece of junk, well, that just means they favorably receive it and read it, but it's still a piece of junk.
But it's still, the alignment of the planets isn't going to help your creative ability to
well, that's right. And where this stuff also really helps is cycles in your personal charts. There are certain people, certain artists that I've worked with. I look at the progressions and transits they have going on. I'm going, wow, this is great. Go, 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 go. And they'll just compile this voluminous amount of work because the dewdrops from heaven are falling, like I like to say. And that's wonderful. And then sort them out later. Who was it? I forget the famous writer. He wrote Gentle Ben. He said, don't get it right, just get it down. And a lot of times we'll have phases in our lives where we're generative with creative ideas that later can be worked on. That's where astrology is useful. You can see when you're hot and when it's time to go head for the hills and create a body of work, so to speak, like the artist heading for the hills. I find those phases, like my wife right now, she's had a progression that's been very null. And I said, but this is a wonderful time to be going inside, creating workings, enhancing skills, etc. And now right here, you're going to step out. And I've had so many artists. It's funny when you have an A-list actor or actress sitting in the chair crying because their personal life is a shipwreck and they just made $20 million on a movie and they're famous all over the world. So, I can't mention names, but it's interesting how our perception of reality for all of us is completely different. For one person having $20 million, you'd say, well, how could you be sad? But yet if a person's personal life is not where they want it to be, that money doesn't make any difference.
Right.
Look at poor Robin Williams. I mean, he had progressions and transits going on. I wish I could have talked to him. I'd have said, even though you have this is going to pass. I mean, he had some really, really challenging, confusing progressions. And what an incredible human being and artist. I mean, find me anybody who didn't like Robin Williams. I mean, that man made a lot of folks happy and laugh. And yet he went through a phase in his life that was really, really challenging. And I know I've gone through those in my own life. And I always want to walk away from astrology, but what keeps me coming back is when I get a client calling me up and saying, you really helped me. I spent $20,000 in therapy, but the astrology helped me to see when it started, when it was peaking, and when it ended. And it's kind of like looking at a topographical map. You at least know that it's got a beginning, middle, and an end. It's like a 3-act stage play, so you approach it differently if you have more conscious awareness of what's hammering on you.
One of the famous people that you have on your bio that I did want to mention is Mother Teresa. I got a kick out of that one being, what did you do for her?
Well, that was not astrology. That
okay.
one there was back when I had my studio. I was doing a number of different industrial films, video and audio production and commercials. And this organization had hired me to do a series of radio programs, videos, and film work. That particular day, I didn't even know I was going to shoot Mother Teresa and record her. What happened, the gentleman said, we've got a very important guest showing up today, so make sure everything's really ship-shape and the crews are all ready. I said, yeah, no problems. And then all of a sudden the police showed up with sniffing dogs and, all this, security. And I thought, this is somebody pretty important. And the next thing I know, in comes Mother Teresa, and I'm giving her a hug. And she sat on this panel speaking about spirituality and morality and all that, and for about an hour and a half. And it was really a treat because she was very sweet. I didn't talk to her too much because it was just hello. And she sat down and we shot the program. And then from there, they whisked her away and off she was to somewhere else.
Well, that's a perfect segue because I did want to ask you about your film company called Conjunction LLC. What is that the type of things you're doing? You're doing ads and short films, or you do full-length feature films?
It's more geared towards feature films. Because that's really where my heart is at. I'm a writer as well as a producer, director, and I've always loved cinematography. I've had the good fortune of working with people like Laszlo Kovacs, Billy Fraker, who was very, Billy Fraker did Bullet with Steve McQueen, and
right.
Of course he's on now. And I actually got to study with Laszlo Kovacs and Foster Dunker, which Laszlo, of course, he did Easy Rider, and he did the Ghostbusters, and so many other wonderful movies, Francis, and on and on. And I've always had an affinity to filmmaking because it combines art and creativity with science. And I love that. I love technology. I love rigging. I love cameras, and I love lighting and the magic of lighting. But it's all to tell a story.
Exactly. Yeah.
I always joke around with my wife, Camille. We look at all this massive equipment and the hardware and rigging it takes to get something done. I said, I think it was easier a bard just telling a story around the campfire. Because when you look at film production, which of course allows for so much more enhancement of a story, you've got, some wonderful things, but it still comes down to a story and characters. And nobody cares when they sit in front of a screen watching something, how you did it. They don't care.
No.
The only thing we care about is, does that story touch me emotionally? Does it move me? And can I relate to it? And all great movies always have something to do with unrequited love, or love at least. And they always have something to do with core human elements that we all have lived, conflicts, wars,
right.
And I think that's why people love old movies so much is, I'm getting sick and tired of seeing zombies and flesh eating,
Well, there
stuff.
is a market for that too. I mean, if you go back to the 1940s and watch the way that they made movies, obviously Citizen Kane, probably one of the greatest ones. And then you sort of see what has happened to movies over the last 5-6 decades. There's not to say there aren't good movies out these days. There's certainly good movies, but the way that they made them is different.
It is different.
Yeah.
And the studio system was largely, I think, a part of that.
Well, the studio systems in those days they owned every aspect of the film, from the production of the film right to the distribution, right to the theaters in many cases. They owned them outright.
They owned the thing.
Yeah. It was like the phone company back in the 60s and 70s. You wanted a phone, you had to call.
They did color grading. They did it all.
Well, listen, Jeff, we are running out of time. The time just kind of flew right by here. I want to mention your website is Jeff Harman, Harman.com. Are you taking clients at this point, or are you booked up? Or, I mean, if somebody was interested in having a session with you, what is the process for that?
Oh, yeah. I'm always doing readings. I have a lot of clients that are regular retainer clients is what I call them. And, but yeah, I've always got people coming in for new readings. People usually start out with like a personal reading where I block out everything. I spend about a half an hour before I get on the phone with someone, and then they log into my computer, and I record the phone line with MP3s. And again, with iPhones and Androids, I just send them the entire session right away on MP3. So yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is jeff@jeffharman.com, and it's A-N, not O-N. So it's Harman.
Okay.
Jeff@jeffharman. But yeah, I do a lot of readings. I actually enjoy it when, I don't care if somebody's, broke or a millionaire. It's nice to help people. And that's, I think, a blessing that I've always felt doing this work is, if I can help somebody to see their potential in whatever capacity they have and keep them from going into a place of non-productivity or depression or finding their path, that always, I think that's what this tool is originally for. It actually supports morality and spirituality much more so than predicting the future.
Well, Jeff, thank you again for coming on the show. It was very informative. I enjoyed talking to you. Best of luck with all of your projects and endeavors.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Jeff Harman, and thank you to the Music X-Ray artists for submitting. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye.
To the